Back here on the 757 at 6 on this rainy yet somewhat seasonably warm Thursday before Christmas. Matt Hatfield with you, and we have a special guest on the line. He is the University of Virginia's radio play-by-play man. You hear him all the time on Cavaliers football and basketball broadcasts, and you can follow him on Twitter too at Wahoo Voice. That is Wahoo Voice. We are privileged to be joined at this time by Dave Koehn. Dave, how's your holiday season treating you?
Pretty good, yeah. I can't complain. Got a nice trip down to the South, and after having never done a game against South Carolina, I got two of them in about 10 days. So far, so good. We're 1 for 1. We'll see if we can make it 2 for 2 next Saturday.
Yeah, how ironic is that? Basketball with a big win we'll get to in a second, 69-52, and that Belk Bowl with the Cavaliers and Gamecocks coming up on December the 29th, a noon kick. But before we dig into the basketball and football teams there at UVA, Dave, what year is this for you behind the mic at UVA?
This is year 11, believe it or not, and time flies. It doesn't seem like it was too long ago that I was just kind of learning what a Wahoo was, but it's been some time, and I've seen some ups, I've seen some downs, but feeling pretty good about the situation these guys are in right now, the direction they're going for both those sports that I primarily cover.
Yes, and a great fan base, too, with the Cavaliers. And I'm always curious to find out with announcers. You spend a lot of nights in airports and hotels logging quite a bit of mileage. But any favorite travel destination on the road, whether it be for football or basketball?
In the Atlantic Coast Conference, let's stick to that. And I think it's a great footprint. That's one of the things I do love about being at Virginia is you've got a footprint that doesn't have you going all over, the geography and the map and everything that goes with that. So we're relatively localized. In terms of favorite spots, it just depends what you're after. But in terms of, of course, I'm partial, but I love Charlottesville from a standpoint of a college town. But I also think in the ACC, if there's another college town, I like Chapel Hill, and I think that's a neat place to go. And always enjoy whether it's football or basketball there. But that's the beauty of the Atlantic Coast Conference, though, because you've got this mix of kind of really neat college towns, and then you've got some big cities sprinkled in there between the Bostons and the Miamis and Atlantas of the world, so you kind of get a taste of it all. But, yeah, I don't know. I guess I would say in terms of college town, probably UNC. In terms of venue, I guess, I actually like doing basketball at North Carolina, too. I enjoy it. I know some people think that the Dean Dome's a little bit stale, but it's as you evaluate these things as a broadcaster, so many of these things you look at are just like personal preference things, and as it relates to like space and all that sort of thing, vantage point to call a game.
Yes.
I like doing games there. I think for big games, they ramp it up pretty good, and when Virginia's been coming there of late, it's been usually a pretty good game.
That should be a fun one again on February the 11th, a 7 o'clock ESPN tip when the Who's and the Heels tip it off. Imagine it would be a top 10 matchup, too. And, Dave, looking at last night's 69-52 win over South Carolina, Frank Martin had some very complimentary remarks about how the Cavaliers played. And what can you say about Ty Jerome, a season-high 25 points, 7 assists, 6 rebounds? I think you'd be hard-pressed to find a guard playing better right now in the whole country.
What's funny about Ty, too, is, he made some big shots, and that's what he does. He makes big shots at big moments, but, it's tough to complain with that stat line, but it's crazy because in the first half, we were remarking about the fact that if you watched him, it probably wasn't his best half by a long shot. He actually missed some shots, some open looks, and was kind of the beneficiary of some open spaces on a couple layups and that type of thing on some turnovers. So, but that kind of got him rolling from there. And as a matter of fact, interestingly enough, coming into that game, he was shooting just 34% in his previous 5 games. So his shot hadn't necessarily been working for him with a consistency I'm sure that he would expect, and I think people who've watched him long enough would. But that's the great thing about guys like that. You just know they're not going to stay down for long, whether it's him or whether it's Kyle Guy. Those guys are kind of cut from the same cloth. And to that point, you can make the case DeAndre Hunter. He's in a bit of a funk right now himself. You look at the last 2 games, he's 3 of his last 16 from the floor, but somehow this team's still finding ways to win against some pretty quality competition, although I will say last night for South Carolina, they were down 3 starters, so it definitely lessened the burden that Virginia was faced with. So, clearly the level of competition is going to go up. I think Virginia's seen a couple good teams. I think Maryland was very solid, and I thought Wisconsin was a good team, but once January 5 rolls around and you've got a regular slew of top 25 teams and in a lot of cases top 10 teams coming in and going there, it's really going to test things. But that's what's fun about the Atlantic Coast Conference. I mean, you get to see how the best fare against the best, and especially when you're fortunate enough to do games like I am for the number 5 team in the country.
Yeah, there's a better conference in the country for college basketball, no doubt about it. Looking at this team, too, I mean, how big of a deal is it that they're 10-0? Only had 5 turnovers the whole game last night. So much fanfare, and understandably so, go to Duke and UNC out of the ACC. But how big of a deal is it that they are 10-0 right now?
This is an interesting time in Virginia basketball because, it's a great accomplishment, but and I don't want to gloss over that. But I do think Virginia has kind of graduated to a spot right now where this team, for better or worse, is going to be judged in March. Last year's the perfect example. I mean, what they did in the regular season was downright historic. To go through that Atlantic Coast Conference with 1 loss was just unbelievable. And to have 3 losses all season, I mean, I saw a number. Virginia in the last 2 years is 41-3. I mean, 41-3. It's just a ridiculous number. But all anybody remembers from last year is UMBC, and that's just kind of how it is right now. And really, it's a good place to be. I'm a University of Kansas graduate. When I was at KU in the late 90s, they were going through a similar stretch where they were experiencing incredible success in the regular season. I think they had a 34-2 season one of the years I was there with Scott. It was Scott Pollard and Paul Pierce and Rafe LaFrance, Jacques Vaughn, all those guys. But they didn't have a whole lot of success in the tournament, and that's kind of what people remembered them for. But so, I mean, I guess as I reflect back to 8 years ago, somebody would have told me you'd be talking about Virginia basketball in that same vein. I would have said, I'll take it any day of the week. But it also comes with some headaches until you can kind of break that door down and get to that Final Four. I think you're going to always have those kind of lingering questions around the program, for better or worse, because it is perception. And in a lot of ways, it does shortchange the value of the regular season, because what they've done over the course of these last few regular seasons is extraordinary. So, but it's where you want to be. I mean, that's just the nature of the game when you have a tournament with single elimination that determines your champion, as college basketball does. It's part of the fun, it's part of the heartache, and it's part of the madness. That's why they call it March Madness.
Yeah, roller coaster of emotions. Got a couple more for you on the basketball side of things, Dave, before we shift gears to football. We're talking with Dave Koehn. He is the voice of the University of Virginia Cavaliers football and basketball program. You can follow him on Twitter, too, at Wahoo Voice. It's the 757 at 6 on ESPN Radio 94.1. And you're around Tony Bennett more than most. Do you marvel at how he's handled the adversity from that being the first 1 seed to fall to a 16 seed with the grace and dignity that he did, and then turn around this year 10-0? We might be talking about, in a strange way, that moment being what possibly spurs this team on to a Final Four?
Yeah, I mean, I think that word you use, grace, is about as good a word as you can describe Tony Bennett with. I mean, the guy is about as balanced as anybody I know, and I'm not just talking about coaches, because typically head coaches, if you spend any amount of time with guys at that level, you don't typically get a ton of balance. But I think what you see is what you get with Tony Bennett. He is one of the most balanced people I know, and I know his faith has a lot to do with that, but I also think he's hardwired that way. He's got an amazing ability to keep things in perspective, and that's not an easy line to walk for a guy that's as competitive as he is, because he is uber competitive. You know, we play tennis together from time to time. Well, we haven't in a little while, but we used to semi-regularly, and we both kind of stopped playing the game for whatever reason. But in those times, you get a little glimpse of just how competitive he was and is. But so to kind of harness that energy while also maintaining balance is pretty unique, and it's been fun to watch. I've learned a lot from being around him, because you hear it all the time. The measure of a man is how he handles himself in adversity, and I think we've seen that time and again from Tony. But now he'd love to not have to put his character on the test at the end of the season through a tough moment. I think he'd be very happy to not have to put that on display this year, but we'll see.
Yeah, we will see. William & Mary's coming up at JPJ on Saturday, 2 o'clock. Then they play host to Marshall on New Year's Eve at 1 o'clock. A lot of Conference USA and ODU fans around here will be interested in that result. Either viewed as really a dangerous game before they go into conference play in your eyes?
I think you're looking at two teams that are very offensive-minded, and I don't know a ton about Marshall. I'm just kind of peeling back the layers on William & Mary right now, but I know that they're programs that have kind of hung their hat on scoring a lot of points, and I think that's a hard thing to do, particularly John Paul Jones Arena and particularly against Virginia. So, I hate to say that neither of them represent a threat because I think anytime you step on that court, anything can happen, is evidenced by what happened to Virginia in round one of the NCAA tournament a year ago. But, I think that this team's in a pretty good position. I think the thing that separates this team maybe from previous teams is the fact that they do have a little more versatility. They can beat you in a number of different ways. I think they can defend a lot of different types of teams just by virtue of the fact that they can go big, they can go small. And Kihei Clark changes this team defensively more than anything, just for that quickness and his tenacity against those guards that at times used to carve Virginia up in the past. But I think this team's got the ability to handle a lot of different things that teams throw at it, but you never know, and that's the beauty of the game, and that's why we enjoy going to the arena night in, night out to just see what's going to play out. But this team's been so steady through the years. I mean, look, when you're coming off of 41 wins in your last 44 games, it's hard to feel too nervous about too many regular season games.
No, very confident for a reason. And as we shift gears to football here with Dave Koehn, the voice of the Wahoos on the 757 at 6 on ESPN Radio 94.1. They got the Belk Bowl in football coming up December 29th, a noon kick with UVA and South Carolina. And this football team this year, Dave, 7-5 record could certainly be deemed better than most from what the prognosticators forecasted before the season. Granted, they did have 3 losses by 4 points or less. Granted, they didn't beat Virginia Tech, and they were so close to doing so. Bowl game, in your eyes, is it determined as a successful season or not?
I think this is an important bowl game. I think that sometimes, every team's different in what it means to them in that given season, but I think in the here and now for this season, this is an important game for Virginia football. I think to get some positive momentum going into the offseason is critical for a team that's lost 3 of its last 4. Because this has been, by just about everybody's account, an incredibly successful season for a program that was picked to finish dead last in the Atlantic Coast Conference Coastal Division. I think it's 4 straight years. So I think they're starting to turn heads, and the other part of it is that Virginia's doing it with youth. They're doing it with a team that is going to be, for the most part, returning intact a year from now. So this experience will translate, I think, into next year. And I think just from an overall perspective, a perspective not only the team, but even from a standpoint of fan buy-in. These things don't happen overnight, but it has been tough sledding for Virginia football over the better part of the last decade. In contrast to the basketball team, these guys just have not had a whole lot to get the fans enthusiastic about. But that's starting to change. 2 years running now, going to back-to-back bowls for the first time since 2004, 2005, the last time Virginia's done that. It just hasn't happened with enough regularity. I mean, this is mentioned when we started talking, my 11th season as the voice of the Cavaliers, this will just be my 3rd bowl game. So, that speaks volumes to where this program has been. They just haven't been here. And I think last year, having to take the lick they did against Navy in the Military Bowl left a really bad taste in their mouth, and I don't think they want that again. I know that's the case. So I think you're going to see a very focused team, and I hope a pretty healthy team, too, for the bowl game against a banged-up South Carolina team that is missing some key players for whether it's injuries or even in the case of their all-conference receiver, Deebo Samuel, who's sitting the game out. We won't even get into that. But, I think it's an important bowl game for this program.
And if you listen to the wise guys in the desert, they have the Who's as a 5.5-point underdog. From the outside looking in, Dave, I kind of like to look at the games within the game, the matchups, if you will. My feeling is offensively, South Carolina might be a bit more explosive. Defensively, UVA is a tad stronger, so special teams might determine the outcome here. What's the storyline or matchup you're watching most closely in this one?
Well, I think that defensive secondary for Virginia against those receivers for South Carolina, whether they have Deebo Samuel or not, they still have talented players there, and I think that's one of the strengths of Virginia's defense. So that's going to be fun to watch, and a good quarterback for South Carolina as well, and Jake Bentley. But the other part of this is the intangible. Who wants to be there more? I mean, that's sometimes what these games come down to, and I think Virginia is very happy to be in the Belk Bowl given the way things played out. And I don't know that South Carolina is maybe as thrilled to be in this position. I think maybe those folks had eyes on the Gator Bowl. They're on the heels of a 7-5 season, which for them, coming from where they've been, is a little bit of a step down. And with all the injuries, I don't know. There's something in my mind that tells me advantage Virginia in this game. I could be completely off base. It is a very talented South Carolina team, but You peel the layers back. I count 9 guys that have started games with some regularity this season for South Carolina that aren't expected to play in this game. That hurts.
Yeah, that's a lot, very much so. And last one, we'll get you on this one, Dave. Appreciate the time this evening on the program. Bronco Mendenhall, he's got the program in the right direction, it does appear, and it feels like there's an identity now with this program. They've taken some steps forward despite that loss to Tech, as we mentioned. Even in recruiting, they land a big name out of our own backyard in defensive lineman Ben Smiley yesterday on signing day out of Indian River High School in Chesapeake. What's your assessment of Coach Mendenhall and where the Who's are big picture under his direction?
Well, I'm really optimistic. I really am. And I'm not just saying that because from day one, everything you hear, every time I listen to Bronco talk, he's got a plan, and it seems incredibly logical, and it seems, as someone who's been around here for a while, like a plan that will fit here at the University of Virginia, which is unlike a lot of other institutions, most institutions for that matter. So fit absolutely matters. And I think that the other thing I've really enjoyed watching and learning about with Bronco through these last couple of years is the fact that he is not too proud to evolve and recognize when he's made mistakes. And he'll tell you, when he first got here, he was not prepared for what he was going to be dealing with from a standpoint of, okay, the challenge that was in front of him in terms of the state of the program. And then the other part of it is in terms of the differences between recruiting to Virginia versus BYU. And I think he admitted the fact that it is different in a lot of ways, and they had to adjust. And I think they have adjusted, and you're starting to see the fruits of that labor with this recruiting class and, the rankings and ratings and all that stuff. I always take with a grain of salt, but the reality is this team goes from, I think, what was the 12th ranked class in the league a year ago to the 6th ranked class this season in the Atlantic Coast Conference. And, again, those numbers don't mean everything because I think the classes he's had actually the last 2 years, and I don't know whether this is just a matter of coaching these guys up, have been pretty good. I mean, you're looking at a group of guys that were unheralded that are becoming guys that you talk about as potential first and second round draft picks. Bryce Hall's name comes to mind first. I mean, here's a kid that was a 2-star recruit when he arrived. I mean, you just don't know what you have until you see him play for a little bit, and I think these guys have been able to identify talent that fits this program pretty well. So we'll keep watching it, but I do feel good about it because I think there's a clear plan. Now, that's half the battle. I mean, you better have an identity. It doesn't mean you're going to win games, but without it, you're definitely not going to win games. You have to stand for something, and I think that's been one of the real secret sauces for Tony Bennett with men's basketball through those years is a clear-cut identity, and I see something similar starting to develop with Bronco Mendenhall.
Well, Dave, thanks so much for the time on the program tonight. Enjoy the Belk Bowl. A Merry Christmas to you and your family, a Happy New Year, and we look forward to getting you back on the show sometime in 2019, all right?
Okay, sounds good. Thank you, Matthew, and happy holidays. Merry Christmas to you as well.
We appreciate it. That is Dave Koehn, the University of Virginia radio play-by-play voice and director of broadcasting with us here on the 757 at 6 on ESPN Radio 94.1.